I see a brand as nothing more than a promise that lives in a consumer's head. And brands are truly owned by consumers, not by you. I'm Eric Ryan. I make everlasting gobstoppers, and you're on Behind the Brand with Brian Elliott.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the show. Eric, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I usually ask my guests, how did you get this job?
I was born with it, whether I wanted it or not. From the earliest age, I just realized I love building and making things. And so I think I had no other choice than to follow this path through life.
Okay, let's go back in the chronology a little bit. Let's go back to young Eric. What did your parents do?
So my parents were Ward and, what's the other one from Leave It to Beaver? Like, I had the Leave It to Beaver parents
Yes.
who were absolutely amazing, loving, and nurturing. And they gave me a childhood that gave me a great place to build from. But my real entrepreneur spirit came from my great-grandparents and my grandparents who were in the automotive industry.
Oh, say more about that.
So my great-grandfather dropped out of, I love the family story. He dropped out of pharmacy school in Iowa moved to Detroit to work for Henry when he was still running the company for $5 a day. And then ultimately he and my grandmother saved enough money that my grandfather dropped out of college. I don't know what it is always about dropping out of college as entrepreneurs. But they went on to start a basically machine and stamping company. So if you ever seen like M&M 8 Mile, the giant pressing plants, that's ultimately what they built. And they ran those companies until the 80s.
Very interesting. Yeah, my grandfather, who I never knew, he ran a simpler metal stamping plant, but he had contracts with the U.S. military, and so they did quite well back then. Did really well.
You get the right lingo down of like metal stamping. And I mean, those plants too were just forces of nature when you would go into them.
Yeah. So that inspired you then. You feel like it's sort of in the genes.
I think so. Yeah, both from like growing up with those stories, but also being around entrepreneur. Detroit's a place of building and making things as well. So I think that was just always instilled in me as early as a kid. I was like, of course I'm going to build things.
What's your earliest memory of something you built or a little invention you had?
Oh, my earliest, commercial venture would be selling buttons. I don't know if you remember like the Boys Life catalog, and there would be like that little button company. You'd buy the little button press and the entire like stock art catalog. So I'd go door to door selling those to anybody I could.
Okay, and then where did that take you?
I just tried to do anything I could entrepreneurial as a little kid. I would build, make hockey nets and try to sell those. I ran the school bookstore, turned it around on Fruit Loops, really strong merchandising program and pricing of the lunchtime crowd. So I was just always trying to sell and make stuff.
Yeah.
I was probably that really annoying neighbor kid who was always working on a new business that he wanted you to invest behind.
I asked that, what do you want to be when you grow up, question, because I think, and this is sort of age agnostic, whether you're just coming out of high school, going into college, or you're 40 something, halfway done. I think we're all trying to figure out our purpose, trying to figure out what we're here to do. And I also think at any point you can change your mind, right? And so we go through seasons, and sometimes, you do something for a season and that's over, and then you do something else, and some, maybe you stay in the same lane, or maybe you jump lanes and go to a completely different food. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how to find their passion, what they're great at, what they love to do. I'm guessing, at least this is what I read in all the different studies, that a majority of people are pretty unhappy at work. It turns out.
Sad. That is so
Yeah.
That is so sad.
Yeah.
Majority of your working life is.
Yeah. And so that's why I ask, like, how did you find your path? And, it sounds like a lot of this was just hardwired into you, and that's wonderful. But I'm always curious about how you navigated that. Did you get any pushback from your parents? Like, hey, you should go be a lawyer, or you should go, be a teacher or something like that?
No, I think I was always supported. They saw me early on that I wanted to follow an entrepreneur path. I was always studying entrepreneurs. I was like reading really dorky books on founders in high school, probably the only kid doing that. So no, they really, really encouraged it. I think where it got interesting is more of like when I got into my first jobs, and then, I was in advertising where you move pretty quickly. So after being at an agency for a year, telling them that I was moving or that I actually delayed I didn't graduate from college on time because I stayed back in London to turn my internship into a full-time job. Those were the moments that probably freaked him out more than anything else.
And so, what were some of the founder books that you were reading? Who are these, like biographies? Because I love biographies too. Yeah.
This is like Vic. I mean, this is back in the '80s, but this is like, yeah, like Victor Kime, who I think started Gillette, or Sam Walton's book definitely left a really big impression on me.
Yeah.
Reading that in high school, but I would read books on entrepreneurship. And I think the one thing that always stuck with me is your chances of success on your first venture are so incredibly low. So that always positioned me for expecting failure when I would start.
Yeah, great point. And is that what happened, or did you find immediate success?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Method was a success out of the gate with a lot of near death moments that should have killed us. And that's what I was like, as an entrepreneur, like you should never have an ego because luck played a role. And like, sure, you create your own luck, but luck always plays a role.
Yeah.
So in hindsight, Method was successful, but I didn't expect it to be. I believed in the idea and I knew the idea would be successful, but I didn't necessarily believe that Adam and I would be able to execute it well enough to make it successful ourselves.
Yeah. So for people who don't know what method is, if they're living in a cave somewhere, what is it, and what's the come up story?
Method really made home care much more enjoyable. So we were the first to combine high design and deep sustainability, so you could have a beautiful product that was kind of part of the decor of your home and beautiful to look at, but also cleaned really, really well with great fragrances and none of the toxic chemicals.
Yeah. And put a timestamp on that. What year is this?
Yeah, this is turn of the century. We launched February of 2001.
Okay, big year. tumultuous year. You launched just before a major historical incident. And so leading up to that, you said you knew Method was going to be successful. How did you know that?
I fundamentally believed in the concept and the idea, and it was just to me, it was so obvious. There was no way that somebody wouldn't think to make these products feel more like an emotional connection to your home. I mean, you look at a dish soap more than you use it, but also would crack a way of how do you make a natural cleaner work as well as a conventional toxic cleaner. And I would just see the way people would light up on the product. So I fundamentally believe that someone is going to do this, and my whole goal was to make sure it was us.
I want to talk about your go-to-market strategy and brand building and all that before I do, I think there's a lot of people who watch and listen to this series that are trying to figure out what I should make in the first place. So like, how did you even identify? It's intuitive now. I mean, hindsight, you have all this like, oh yeah, of course that's going to work because nothing else existed. But did you identify that, hey, there's something missing? Our houses are not beautiful and they're full of toxic chemicals. I mean, how did you go? What was the process in discovering that opportunity?
Yeah, there's a couple kind of steps to it, and it really starts with my career in advertising. So I was a planner starting in London, and the role of a planner was to do is to take great consumer insight, really take that research function, and translate it to create a brief. And so you really live between consumer insight and the creative design team, and those have been the foundation of my career as a founder. So everything I do is about identifying like what is a meaningful consumer insight or a culture shift that a category has missed. How do I translate that to really great creative execution? So that's the foundation of what I understood how to do. And then I was really inspired when I lived in London. Richard Branson was really at the kind of the peak of his game. And I love how he had a model, which is like this entertainment model. He would take these really boring categories and would sex them up by bringing in this more entertainment approach. And so I was really inspired by going after boring products, and that was because of him. And I was doing a project for Colgate back here in the U.S., so I was spending a lot of time in a grocery store. And I just started looking at the home care category, which was just like this big sea of sameness, and these legacy brands have been around forever. And so that was kind of the clue to dig here. And then as I got into it, trying to figure out, I was like, okay, what is this space missing? And I think this is a lesson that applies for any entrepreneur of like, where's the world going and how can I bring this category along? And so I figured out, one, it was this idea of lifestyling of the home. You look at these products more than you use it. At the time, home decor was really taking off in the U.S. IKEA had just arrived in the U.S. shores. Home and Garden Television had launched. And then, but the second, as we got into it, for Adam and I, we realized like, wow, like it's a dirty industry. You pollute when you clean. You're asked to use poison to make your home healthier. So we realized there was no way we were going to leave, bottles of Pretty Little Poison sitting on everybody's countertop. So we tapped into the second culture shift, which was sustainability and health and wellness.
Yeah. Brilliant. I want to go back and ask about consumer insights. So, when you're at the agency, I'm sure you had the luxury of a team and you had probably software and other things. You didn't have that maybe when you started Method. How did you understand consumer insights? What kind of research did you do?
No, you're right. Within a like we did both qualitative and quantitative. So we would, qualitative would be like traditional focus groups, in-home interviews, and then quantitative, obviously, much more like analytical work. And those are, at the time too, those were very expensive tools. So I didn't have access to that on my own company. So what I relied a lot on was actually just looking at trends. And so I was a big believer of appropriating. Like you look at where a trend is already manifesting or working in one part, and you kind of steal it and bring it over to the other place. So appropriation is just a very fancy word for stealing. And so if you look at a lot what I do with my brand, starting with Method, is I would steal from categories. So with Method, I stole from the housewares category. If you look at our products, they look like beautiful vases sitting on your countertop. But I also stole from personal care. So I brought these really great, more trend forward fragrances from the world of personal care, and I brought it into home care, where at the time it was like pine and lemon, these really, really bad traditional scents. So that's a lot of how I would approach it without a budget.
Brilliant. I love that. And we're seeing that today in different variations and iterations. I mean, who would have thought that you could reinvent water, and Liquid Death has done it and made it sexy again by stealing from the beer industry or from Red Bull, and making it kind of a little bit more edgy and exciting, but it's still water in a can.
Or they just kind of stole from the world of rock and roll, of music. And that's a great example. When I saw that for the first time, I was like, why didn't I think of that? So good.
Yeah. And also, to your point, they probably looked a lot at health and wellness, that there's this trend that people are drinking less alcohol and they want to be more fit and healthy, and wellness is a trend. And so what's more healthy than water? Nothing. So,
And they got out of plastic. So there was a sustainability story there as well. Even though it was like this rebellious brand, it actually has this really great side to it around the environment.
Yeah. So it has a lot of those key points that you just mentioned. Yeah, I love that. So let's talk about brand. This show is called Behind the Brand. We talk a lot about brands. People come here to learn how to build their brand. First of all, before I ask about your personal brand and maybe some of the brands that you've built, let's define what a brand is. How do you see it?
I see a brand as nothing more than a promise that lives in a consumer's head. And brands are truly owned by consumers, not by you.
Yeah. And okay, so I'll push back on that because I agree, but I'm just playing the other side of it for fun. If the brand lives in the hearts and minds of other people, how do you even define what it is in the first place? Like, so how do you put a stake in the ground? How do you, build that reputation? Like, what's the process of figuring out what your brand is? Like, does Eric Ryan have a personal brand?
Yeah, I kind of do, but egotistically, I hate leaning into it. But yeah, my personal brand very much is about bringing this inner child approach to these very serious adult categories.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's Willy Wonka.
But so I would say that a brand is distinct, that it's, it stands for something. It's a reputation. It's a shorthand. Even just looking at you, I could just make some judgments and assertions. First of all, you have sort of a playful hairstyle, right? And that's
or lack of.
No, no. I mean, I've seen you a couple different times now, and your style is playful. If I look behind you, you have a very nice, put together, well designed background. If what I'm seeing is what I'm actually getting.
My home office.
Yeah. So it's white, it's crisp, it's clean, it looks modern, but it also is very colorful. Again, complementing your playful, maybe energetic style. And so I can make some judgments, but it seems like you are walking the talk. And I think that's what a brand does. So it stands for something, it's distinct, it's differentiated from others. Otherwise, it's, I've given this example many times, Marriott and Hilton and Hyatt, these folks have hotel brands, but they're not distinct, right? Like if you were to go to the lobby of any of those hotels and kind of, look down at the carpet, there's no way you could tell where you are. You could be in any one of those hotels or any 100 different hotels.
It is shockingly bad carpet.
Yes.
I'm like, somebody approved this. How did that happen?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, if you're not distinct, you're just sort of a commodity, and then you're in this list by price or sort by price, whether I'm searching on the internet or on Amazon, wherever I'm searching, and people are not loyal to you. They're just going to pick whatever's convenient or the best price or whatever. So being distinct, being differentiated and memorable is super important, I think, when building your brand. How did you approach this with, let's say, method?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I approach it in so many different ways. And for me, building a brand, it's a process.
Yeah.
And kind of starting with that place of ultimately, what do you want the consumer to feel, right? Because the best brands have an emotional connection,
Yes.
but they have a combination of emotional and rational, and trying to find that balance. But it starts from a place of like, what do I want people to feel and experience with this brand? Because ultimately, if they're going to own it, what is that feeling I want them to have?
Right.
And I'll try to get to the place of really, really aligning behind a core meaning behind the brand. And then I'll start kind of breaking it apart. And so I want a brand that, first of all, I think it's back to what you said too, around really the personality of a brand and emotional connection. And I think so many companies underestimate that humans ultimately relate to things in human ways. And so we relate to brands in human ways. And so building a brand personality, I think arguably is one of the biggest points of differentiation that are often underestimated, because they're not seen as like something that's defendable personality. So I put a lot of time of like, once I understand of like, what's the feeling I want somebody to have with this brand? How do I build that personality? And back to your point of like doing it in the most unexpected and unique way possible. So it sticks, but it also just really, really breaks through. And then I'm a big believer, like the product is the brand. So I'll start breaking out of like, okay, what's the brand proposition and what is the product proposition? And how do those things live together? And I just love the process of creating the entire imagery, the name, the voice around it. And it's almost like crafting a character in a story, and bringing that character to life.
Yeah. How did you arrive at method? Did you have alternative names for that?
That one we didn't. With anything, you kind of get lucky. So Adam and I were living together in this like incredibly dirty flat in San Francisco with 6 other guys. We were both brushing our teeth at the same time, and we were kind of brainstorming about the name. And I said, the name needs to represent technique. So like when you go to the gym and use good technique, that gives you power without force. And he's like literally brushing his teeth. He's like, how about method? I was like, that's it. It's like, done. So of course you tell a trademark lawyer that you want to own the word method. They're like, guys, like that is like way too generic. You're never ever going to own that brand name.
Yeah.
And so we went back, and I couldn't come up with anything else. And so I went to him. I was like, all right, if you were me and you thought this brand name would actually increase the probability of success, what would you do? And he's like, oh, I would go for it. And of course we did. And 2 years later we got it.
Amazing. How much time and effort did you put into like, typeface and color schemes, and, your brand is not your logo for sure, but all of that, like, I don't know, heart and soul, all that part of it is important.
Yeah, I obsess over it. Even if you look at the method logo, the .m. So originally I was working on a naming where it'd be like kitchen method, bathroom method, toilet method. And then the mark just looked too long on the label. But I love that little .m in front of it. And so ultimately kept it for no other reason other than as part of like the history of the brand.
So yeah, the process of, I love that analogy of creating a character like you're writing it into a movie or for a book, because that is what building a brand, I think that's what the process looks like. That's a great illustration of the process. Um, what went wrong? So it seems like you had a lot of quick successes. The name came quickly. You got the trademark in a couple of years. Things took off. But what went wrong in order to get it right?
Yeah. So much goes wrong with any
Yeah.
startup, and that's why I always tell entrepreneurs like go easy on yourself. It's an iterative process trying to figure it out. So what went wrong early? Nothing in the initial launch other than two guys trying to figure out how do you make a product and sell it. I mean, we literally go in, we sell it to independent grocery stores, find that store manager at 6 a.m. I think they always say yes because they realize you're going to keep coming back. And that first phase, things went pretty well. Our glass cleaner wasn't the best, but generally went okay. Where things started to go wrong actually was later in that year. First of all, with fundraising, kind of as you alluded to the events of 2001, we were scheduled to sign our term sheet on the morning of 9/11
Wow.
with Simon Brand Ventures, who was based in New York. Obviously, the world had changed that day.
Mhm.
We were able to raise capital a little later that year, but that in itself, we almost ran out of funds. The biggest thing that went wrong for us is when we made the leap to Target. So at the time, like Target did not work with startups. We had about 800 grocery stores on the West Coast that we were serving. We were about 2 years in, and we used marketing to get a meeting with the buyers using Kieran Rashid, the famous designer, to get a meeting with marketing. And we did this full dog and pony show. And really, the only way this business was ever going to be successful or scale is if we had a national customer like Target. And when I raised my Series A, of course, I shot off my mouth of like, they're Target, they're about design, we're about design. Like,
Mhm.
their guests, like, they are going to love it. Um,
Yeah, this is the time like when like Mizrahi and those guys were getting deals too, right? Like,
Oh yeah, Philippe Stark was in there with his design for all, and so I
yeah.
just felt like we were perfect. The buyers initially said no. They literally said snowball's chance in hell. So we were a little like dumb and dumber. You're like, so you're saying there's a chance? And the road forward is always less scary than the road back once you've taken capital. And so ultimately, we used Kieran. We got this meeting with marketing. They invited the buyers who were less than thrilled that we went over their head. And so they ultimately agreed to a 90 store test in the Chicago area in Northern California. So they gave us an end cap. They gave us a metric that it was like what Tide would do on sale. Like we didn't realize at the time, but we would never have hit this metric. And I remember I walked into the first Target store, so excited to see this end cap, and my heart just dropped when I saw that at the top we did these beautiful Karen Rashid, incredibly innovative dish soaps. It was the world's first inverted display or inverted bottle. So instead of turning the dish soap over, you just pick it up, squeeze it. But what happened is the fragrances were so unique. Customers were trying to smell them. They were pulling the cap in a way it wasn't supposed to be pulled, and the cap would come off. They couldn't get it back on. They'd put it on the shelf. So we'd walk in, and our entire displays would just be raining dish soap down them.
Oh,
Hard way to sell a product when it's covered in dish soap.
yeah.
And so I just spent weeks driving store to store, cleaning up, doing everything we could, passing coupons, still missing the number. And then Target asked us to come back in for a check-in meeting. I was like, oh, I can't believe we're going to fly all the way to Minneapolis just to be told we were discontinued. And of course, we'd be out of business. And we got really lucky. A new buyer came on the desk. She saw how incremental and differentiated we were, gave us national distribution. And within maybe 5 years, we're doing $100 million of sales at Target.
Wow. So let's break that down just a little bit. So before the buyer was not wild because you went over his head or her head?
Yes, Ed.
His head, okay. So that was a choice that you made because you thought that maybe you'd get rejected. So you shot above. Interesting choice. And I mean that was pretty
It was
gutsy.
a risk.
Pretty risky, yeah. Uh, but you, I guess, did some calculation. You thought maybe the regular buyer guy was not the guy. Maybe not sophisticated enough, or not. What was it? Maybe taste level low, or
That was the snowball's chance in hell comment that probably did it. And then
yeah,
they didn't like the name. I was like, "You're Target. How do you not like method?" I tell
yeah,
this story at Target regularly, by the way.
yeah,
And but it was because of like that person who came in and thought like a merchant
yeah.
and recognized what we were trying to do. In the care, it's interesting. The Caramel Seed dish soap that we did, it looks like almost like a bowling ball pin. It ultimately was not a commercial success. We had to price it at $5. As I mentioned, we fixed the leaking on shelves, but it was not a commercial success. We ultimately later discontinued it. But I would argue we would never have been successful if we did not do it, because it made such a statement about our capabilities, the way we saw the future of the category. We got so much press around it, and it really made a statement.
Yeah.
And I don't think we would have succeeded as a company if we had not taken that risk.
Yeah, and that just goes back to being different, differentiating yourself from all, everything else that looked like whatever it looked like, square, cylindrical, boring, toxic, whatnot. You guys totally went the opposite. You zigged when everyone else was zagging, and it seems like that was part of the magic formula. The other part is, of course, luck, that the buyer changed out and you had a new person with a new POV who was probably more in tune or aligned with your strategy, which was the right strategy to begin with. But we have obstacles all the time. I think back to my career. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and it's mainly because I haven't had a lot of good bosses. I just was thinking I could do it much better. So forget that. I'm going to try it on my own. But
Who is your worst boss, and what lesson did they teach you by being such a bad boss that you've carried forward? Because I'm a big believer you can learn from bad bosses as much as good bosses.
yeah, that is a great question. There's so many. The one that I remember, though, that was so difficult at the time, uh, he was clearly, so I was young, and he was very seasoned and experienced. Good at what he did, but he's one of these guys that would say, "Hey, we've been doing it this way for 30 years," and that just, you know,
Right there.
it was like, "Oh, okay, it's on." Like, there's a lot of things that should change about this, um, and so as a young, ambitious person, I know for sure that I intimidated him, and that he probably felt like the flames were, licking at his heels with me and all my big ideas. And so as a result, he withheld a lot, and he kept it close to the vest, and he did all the gatekeeping. So he didn't share information with me, he didn't share knowledge, tried to hold me down, could not hold me back because I was, young and dumb, and I had nothing to lose, and I had great ideas, and I was super ambitious, and I made a lot of mistakes too. But um, I learned a lot from him that I don't like to gatekeep anymore. In fact, that's part of me is teacher, and that's why this series is about. Like you can consume this for free. I've done 500 episodes with some of the smartest people on the planet, and it's all free. And that's probably a result of him traumatizing me with all the gatekeeping.
But you learn so much from teaching, and so that's the beauty of doing this. But
Yeah.
yeah, gatekeeping is anybody. If you find yourself gatekeeping, comes from a place of insecurity. You need to look inward.
Yeah. Staying on that subject, how did you feel about like sharing your big ideas? Did you keep everything secret, or did you build in public a bit, or did you ask people their opinions? Like, were you afraid of sharing your ideas? I hear that a lot. Like, people are just so afraid to share their brilliant ideas, and I'm thinking it's fine.
Yeah, I just had this conversation with an entrepreneur yesterday, and I said, please share freely and openly, and I always do that. I think the reason, for one, like, look, if you share your idea with somebody and you fail because they out executed you, then like look inward. Like ideas are easy, execution is really, really hard.
Yeah.
And also, with any success story in entrepreneurship, where you start and where you end up is rarely the same place. It's an iterative process. So everything is about launch, learn, optimize, launch, learn, optimize. And I find the real value of sharing your ideas openly is one, just the process of thinking out loud with somebody about your idea forces you to make it better. Two, you're constantly practicing your pitch when you share that idea. Three, free feedback. Four, that person, while they may not be able to help you, they may introduce you to somebody who you can. And also, like, how few people have a great idea, but they never actually execute it. I think when you start sharing your ideas, what I found is it put pressure on me to follow through with it. Because if I just talk about it and then somebody comes back and asks how I did, and I'll be embarrassed if I didn't do anything. So I always I find it's a really important process to share your ideas as you start to develop them.
Yeah. How much? What was your Series A? How much did you fundraise?
Oh God, Series A originally on Method was 1 million. Our Series A's, the brands that I've done ever since have been anywhere from 5 to 10 million now.
Hmm.
But originally that was a Method. The one thing I'd say too on sharing that I did and I still do today is what I'll do is I'll write up the concept or the idea and bring it to life the best way I can, and then I'll give it to like the 20 smartest people I know, and I'll tell them, please review this and come back with the 3 reasons why you think it's going to fail. I think what happens is when you ask people to give feedback on your ideas, nobody wants to ruin someone else's dream, or they feel insecure that they don't know. So you
Right.
have to empower them to come back and tell you why this is flawed. And I did that with Method when nobody could come back with a reason that it was flawed other than why has nobody else done this before?
Yeah.
That it's all about building those little elements of confidence.
Yeah. How about sourcing? I mean, did you have to go overseas for this? How did you find your materials? Did you have any logistics or supply chain issues?
I mean, it all starts with a Google search, and
Okay.
like I mean, compared to when we started Method today, the resources available, particularly around consumer products for startups, is tremendous. Like co-mans did not work with startups then without a lot of work. Today, there's co-mans dedicated fully to startups, but I found that it's just a lot of investigation work of searching and then asking for other references when you get to somebody who's not the right person. But I think that one thing entrepreneurs often underestimate is the importance of finding great vendor partners and getting them to believe in your vision. And I think a lot
Yes.
of times people walk in and they expect to be treated like the client because they are the client. But I always treat our vendor partners as true partners, and I'm always trying to sell them on what we're doing and get them emotionally involved. Because if you're going to do something innovative, it means it hasn't been done before, and you're going to need people who are willing to take those risks with you and make those investments.
Yeah. Were you able to negotiate better terms or better MOQs, or is that what happened?
I always try to structure it where up front I ask them for concessions on margin and like help us get started, but with the carrot and the promise that once we prove this out, you'll have the opportunity to continue to scale and work with us, and we'll be great partners.
Yeah, I think that's smart, and it's sort of subtle what you just said, but promising someone exclusivity and not just bouncing to the next factory or bouncing to the next rep or whatnot, because the vendor wants the same thing as you do. They want stability. They want to know that they're going to be in business for the next 1 to 10 years. Absolutely.
That's right. You really want to build a relationship with them and treat them as a true partner, and they're often the unsung heroes in successful startups.
Yeah. And so after Method, now uh, tell us the story of what happened after that. So you had this run, you had a big success. Did you just sit on your laurels? Did you camp out on a beach somewhere, or like what happened?
Well, I went to go answer the question, am I good or am I lucky? And am I doing another startup? Which is terrifying because when you have one that went, look, with Method, we made so many mistakes and learning a lesson. And I was sitting with two thoughts. One thought was, I want to apply all of those mistakes and learning again. And the second was, I want to answer the question, which was terrifying, is could I do this again?
One hit wonder. Yeah.
Exactly. And once you've gone through it the first time and you see how many, like if the ball had just bounced a little differently, like this would not have turned out the way it did. And then you have to live with yourself because you're only as good as, your last at bat. And
Hmm.
so I went to go start Ollie. Ollie, like similar to Method, like any business I start, I've thought about for a long time. I'm always kind of noodling it. It isn't like a single bulb moment. It's definitely kind of iterating an idea and then building the confidence. And then what I find, I get to a place of like, I can't not see this come to life. So I'm going to go do it. And Ollie was the same. So I was working with Target on a program called Made to Matter, and we were looking for these wellness brands that really connected at the time with the millennial mom. And so we didn't have a vitamin brand, so I went check out the vitamin aisle to see if I could spot anything who we should invite. And I just saw this like dog's breakfast, this category that is supposed to be healthy, but literally people are stressing out trying to navigate that. And so that was the clue dig here. And as I dug in, I go back to that same exercise. I'm like, all right, what is the category missing? And what I figured out was millennials, every generation has a different relationship with health. At the time, millennials that were not really in the vitamin category, but they were starting to take center stage in their 20s, I recognized that millennials view health and wellness as a lifestyle pursuit. So that became my trick. I was like, okay, what if we really repositioned vitamins as a lifestyle product? And we stole from the beauty aisle into the nutrition aisle. And that was the initial concept, and brought it together and did the same thing of sharing it with Target, but also sharing it with as many people as I could to have them shoot holes in it.
Yeah. And what happened?
Nobody could come up with a reason. Even though I heard a lot of like, well, millennials don't buy vitamins, but I was like, yeah, but they're buying supplements and and functional beverages and all these other categories. It's just no one's really created this aisle to work for them.
Yeah, they're buying edibles.
Exactly. It's like it's showing up in other places. Again, anything I do should be painfully obvious.
Yeah.
That's kind of my litmus test for success. And so I showed it as a concept to Target. They got behind it. A year later, we launched on Made It Matter. Did it really, really quickly. Put together the team, the capital. And again, what scared me also is when I went to go start Method, like raising capital was brutal. And the way I thought about it is like you're going through the rock tumbler trying to raise capital, but that rock tumbler polishes you. It really pressure tests your idea. It makes you better. And with Ollie, when I started shopping to raise a $5 million Series A, I got yeses instantly. I was like, oh crap. Like, I don't know, like with anything, like you want to get pressure tested. I don't want people to believe in the idea just because I did it once. I need you to look at this idea and really scrutinize it. So that made me a little nervous, but ultimately we launched it at Target. With anything, a lot of it worked, some of it did work, and then we quickly optimized it. And that company was scaled from 0 to 100 million in 4 years, and then ultimately exited it 4 years into Unilever.
Yeah. So I have maybe a weird question, which is why go after more venture capital? Why raise 5 million if you maybe have 5 million of your own money to play with? Why get other people involved? Why is that the model?
The model was because, one, I didn't want to I'm pretty risk averse. And if you look at the categories, Malcolm Gladwell did that beautiful piece years ago on the myth of the entrepreneur's risk taker, and the belief that actually successful entrepreneurs are very risk averse. And I would say I fall in that same camp. Like I choose proven business models. Like, I really test everything and so the same thing came with capital that with Method, we did well. We didn't do well enough. We were never going to work again. But we did well. And I had 3 young children, and I didn't want to put all that capital back at risk. I did put a $500,000 of my own money into it, which is quite significant. So I did put capital at risk. It's funny, looking back at it, my number one regret is I didn't put my capital into it, more of it. But at the time, I thought it was just too risky because I knew how hard it is. But the second is like, I really love capital partners. And I love having people who are in it with you, who have skin in the game, and who are going to be there to help ensure that it's successful. So I had great capital partners, and I really enjoyed those partnerships.
Yeah, maybe let's just underscore that because that's a big deal. If you have great partners, people who believe in you, people who will be basically hands off, not put their fingers in the soup all the time, I think it works. The opposite is true, right? Like, you go in and they're constantly micromanaging you and wondering where, if their money is going to, turn over in the next 12 months or, however quickly they want their money back. That's a nightmare to me. And if they don't let you do what you want to do creatively, if they're talking about making the logo bigger or the blue's not blue enough, that's the worst kind of partner I can think about. But yeah, when it's good, it's good.
I had a rule, and like this is not a easy rule to always follow, but for me it served well. And my rule was I would only take capital from people who are either previous or current operators. And so my entire board was an investor. So like James Joaquin would be a great example. Like James, who runs Obvious Ventures with Ed Williams, wonderful partner. They've been in several startups with me. I'm an LP in the fund as well. But Evan James, are entrepreneurs who had started multiple companies before they turned to build their own fund. So I had Tim Kugel who built Yahoo. Like I had these great Pat O'Day who did Pete's Coffee, these really, really great operators around me. And I found that when he took capital from an operator, they understood how hard it is. They were there to help you. They couldn't help but roll up their sleeves when you
Yes.
needed help versus professional money managers who have to look at everything, through a P&L. And it's a lot harder for them to be able to provide support, help. So that was kind of the rule that I followed.
Yeah, great. That's a great tip. I mean, that's gold. So important. Um,
When I went out and raised my original Series A on Method, I sat down with Howard Schultz and Jim McCain of 1-800-Flowers were two of my pitch meetings. And then I met with a ton of funds. And I saw quickly the difference. They were so focused on me as an individual, not my plan. They knew the plan was fiction. Like, if I give you this money, I'm betting on you, and are you going to find a way to make this successful? Where you sit there with a fund, and they would want to go so deep into the P&L projections of 5 years out, and you're like, the one thing I know is this is wrong.
right.
Like, I know it's not right. And that was a huge lesson for me.
How was that with Howard Schultz? I mean, that must have been super intimidating. Was he intense?
I mean, he was one of the books that I read in high school, and
Yeah.
he went to school in Michigan, and so that was somebody I always followed and admire as an entrepreneur. So I was just thrilled to get that pitch meeting with him. He asked really thoughtful questions. I saw him in the bathroom, and one of those bathroom moments, and he looked over at me from the urinal, and he's like, really impressed with what you're doing, and like I was like, oh my god, I know, it's just uh, really, really impressive. And at the time, we were started working on a laundry concept, and he was really fascinated by laundry, which I would not expected. In the end, we didn't go with him. It was just his fund Mavron. Tim Kugel came in with a higher valuation. They lowballed us on valuation, and when I circled back with them, they doubled the valuation. And I was like, "This is a marriage, and it doesn't feel great when you first try to give me a lowball valuation, knowing that it was worth higher." And then Tim was very fair and ultimately became one of my great mentors, and I just loved working with him.
Great story. So where do you see the white space now? Where are things headed? I think we're deep in the wellness era, if we're going to call it that. Recovery, repair, wellness. Seems to be everywhere. I just did a story with the guys from Plunge who made the cold plunges, and I've done stories with Whoop. That Whoop strap that you wear that calculates your heart rate variability and all of that. Where do you see it moving? Are we staying in wellness for a while, or?
Yeah, I mean we're riding this huge culture shift between Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and I have a Gen Z daughter who's at NYU, and so and two boys who are at the end of Gen Z, but they're so digital they almost present more Gen Alpha. And when I first worked in advertising, I was fascinated with generational marketing, and it's something that's really stuck with me. So for me, really understanding how Gen Z and Gen Alpha are going to remake a lot of these categories. And what's also interesting is they're having a bigger impact on their parents of millennials and Gen Xers than any other generation because so much of that information is consumed digitally and through TikTok. And so for me, that is and then layer on AI on top of it, that it's less about categories right now, and it's how our categories going to be remade by these generations. And I love great aesthetic, as you kind of pointed out before. I'm very design driven. I love great aesthetic. But the presentation of these generations, these brands, both in their media and marketing, as you know, is so unpolished.
Yeah.
It's with purpose, but it's so unpolished. And that, for me, I'm trying to get my head around right now of how is that going to impact what I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just launched a candy brand called Tandy, Tandy. So the URL is tandy.co, or you can find us on Instagram. I'm trying to create a new category called functional candy. So better
Okay.
food candy with functional benefits. And I've always had a little Willy Wonka in me wanting to create this category, but that is very much like we're trying to understand this generation and their impact on the candy category already.
Can we talk about influencers for a second? Because that reminded me. So you know who Mr. Beast is. You know who Logan Paul is.
Yep, my boys bring him into my house every week.
Yeah. So, how do you look at influence, and how can a brand leverage working with an influencer, or maybe build a personal brand? Because my hot take on this is, I'm applauding these guys who, and they're 24 years old, 25, but they've been in the business for 10 years already. Like they started when they were 15, right? Which is amazing. And they've earned every bit of attention and penny that they've gotten, and it's great. But then I see these collabs with a drink like Prime, which I know is really bad for you, and Mr. Beast making chocolate bar, and then they put it into, they're trying to disrupt Lunchables. I think they have a Lunchables competitor, which they're selling to kids, and I just think, man, it's the wrong direction. Like all this power and all this opportunity you've got, you get it. I don't know. I just think that's the wrong play to perpetuate unhealthy eating to kids.
Yeah, I I agree. I think first of all, influencer is fascinating right now, and it took me a long time to get my head around influencer marketing. That actually it's really lazy marketing. That you create a brief and a story, you then give freedom to that influencer to go tell that story how they see fit, and then you watch how the audience reacts to that story, and that's your insight of how you amplify it. And it's a really lazy version of marketing where I came from very much top down. You create an umbrella campaign, there's an amp,
Yeah.
and so it's taken me a while to realize it's okay to you have to really let go in this new age of marketing.
Yeah.
I, th- I'm a big believer in the power of influencers to build awareness and drive trial. But I think, as you alluded there, at the end of the day, the product proposition has to be incredibly strong to drive repeat. And if you look at everything I do within my brands, there's not a single product attribute. I'm really trying to create an experience all the way through it. And so it's a multi-layer product experience that's really well thought out. And that's what drives repeat and try or repeat after you get that trial. And so I think that's where the limitations start to show up. If they don't also build great products, in a lot of ways, influence can kill that product even faster because it drives trial and then the open sharing on it. And where it seems to be working is like in really simple products where there's a little less differentiation.
Yeah. I'm just curious too if it's generational or not yet. I have a Gen Alpha son, and he seems to care less and less about like where things are made or who makes them. He just wants it to be awesome. He wants it to, suit his needs. And this is, I think, a departure from like maybe my generation where, you know, yeah, there is some like something to when we make products in the United States. Okay, that's great. There's some we're keeping it here, and we're giving people jobs. That at the same time, I understand that my Apple phone cannot be made here because it's just not just doesn't pencil out. It's got to be made overseas, China. Even when I worked my way through college at Ralph Lauren, all the fabrics were Malaysia, Mauritius, and they were sourcing fabrics from all over the place. I understand that, but have you seen any of that? Like that, kids these days they don't necessarily care about where things are made or who makes it. Seen any of these insights?
Yeah, I think we're in the midst of a third in our lifetime, a third major shift in how brand and marketing is done. So,
Yeah.
the first was really the modern age of mass media, right? So the 30-second spot, you essentially you own an attribute and you just hammer that attribute home until that brand proposition. And I would argue in a lot of ways, method we are part of the second wave, which was it's not about the product, it's really about the community and the person. And
Yeah.
it's that shift from the what to the why behind it, right? So you built these mission value driven brands. And then that way it allowed you to take an audience and serve multiple needs across that audience, which is why we went with method from, you know, Windex, that's all about owning streak free, to method that could go across your home, your body, really is these lifestyle brands, right? And then we saw this, then we saw kind of a wave off of that of D2C brands, and it was very millennial. And now we're getting into Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and I completely agree. They really care about the environment and social causes behind it, but the why of the company is less so much matter, just matters so much less.
Right.
And I think we're still seeing it unfold and trying to understand it. What is the role of influencer within it?
Yeah. And part of that manifestation is the fact that TikTok Shop is now, becoming an Amazon, and TikTok itself is becoming a search engine, much like, it's not replacing YouTube, but it's becoming an alternative to it. When you want to search for how to do something or learn something, you're going to another social network, and then it's enabling you to make a purchase right there. So stay in the experience, click a button, and it can come right to your house. So it's evolving. It's a moving target, but I'm watching it so closely. I'm just fascinated.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing like within a category, right? It's you start to have growth either on winning on experience or winning on price or convenience. And I mean, that's just the laws of any category. And I think we're watching that unfold right now of like retail that's winning is retail that's worth getting in your car for. I mean, we're social sensory creatures. So like we're always going to love physical retail, but you have to win on an experience and give you a reason. That's what I'm trying to do with Cast, the jewelry brand. It's like we want it to be experiential, or you're going to win on price and convenience. And that's so well served online.
Yeah.
And it's always a race, ultimately it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah. Well, that influencer piece too is so interesting because I think that's the third, if there's a trifecta, that's the third piece, because you're seeing your favorite influencer, whether that's Livy Dunn in, Viore clothing, or, the next flavor of the month, wearing this or driving that. And it does influence you to some degree, whether that's to get in the top of the funnel or head right down to the bottom and click purchase. But that's the next frontier, I think.
Yeah, I think that's where product matters so much too, because it's really about then how you tie great product into those influencer stories, and it's also what drives a lot of that freshness. Where do you see the role of influencer evolve? How do you see it evolving?
I think the opportunity is for the power to shift back into the hands of the influencer. So I think the poster child for this is like Emma Chamberlain, for example. So Emma started this YouTube channel. She amassed a large audience, 10 million subscribers. She became wildly popular. She's still only, I think, 23, 24 years old. And in every single episode of her YouTube series, she's drinking a coffee. And so a natural extension of her personal brand was to create a coffee brand. And so she launched Chamberlain Coffee. It's been wildly successful. They did a run at Erewhon, and they're a $20 million company. Not humongous, but $20 million, pretty respectable for a personal brand. And so I like these. I don't like influencer collaborations as much as I like influencer homegrown personal brands growing into products. So another one is Hailey Bieber, who's done it well. She started this cosmetic brand called Rhode, or Selena Gomez. These are bigger names, but I think the opportunity, even for what I call like a micro influencer, is, you think about it as MVA or MVP. It's like you don't need to have 20 million fans. You just need the right number of fans to fulfill your MOQ and to put enough money in your bank to accomplish whatever your objective is. So if that's to run a $500,000 business every year, I think that could be a pretty good business for someone who has the right amount of fans. Let's call it 1,000 true fans, like Kevin Kelly says, to float their boat and to live the kind of life that they want to live.
No, I think that's right. And also now that, both direct access for selling and supply chain has become so much more favorable.
Yes.
For building a brand. I think the big challenge is, as like I'm going to go back to product, the capabilities as well as the investment to create truly transformational, great product is hard. And a lot of these brands I see rely on, they very much rely on their image and their marketing much more than building like incredible products.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's their distraction. So like a Michael Bay movie. Hey, watch this explosion and forget that there's no plot. All right, man. Thanks for your time, Eric. It's been awesome.
I mean, we were just sitting back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that. Tracking my roots, where I came from and where I'm going. But like I say, man, always said it. It's not about the destination. Nope. It's all about the journey. It's all about the journey, baby. Ain't nothing changed but the weather. The dangling carrot that hang from the rear view. Your dreams in the past ain't nowhere near you. Backseat drivers got nothing but 2 cents. Shotgun riders too biased, they all liars. I should get an A for effort, I'm too tired. But I'm never giving up, that's why I'm kinda admired. Role model, like it or not, I gotta play it. Sugarcoat the rhyme sometimes, but still say it. Said I was quitting at 40 is just a fib. I'm still a kid that's wiping the food off of my bib. You ever wanted something so bad that you could taste it? Cried over every opportunity wasted. Good and bad news, which one you want first? Either way you pick, the bad still gon' hurt you the worst. I never got to bask in the fruits of the labor, and I never got the cash from that dude from the label. I'm just thinking back. Can we go way back, way back, way back? Can we go way back, way back, way back? It's time to go way back, way back, way back, way back. You see, in retrospect, I would've did it the same. In hindsight, I'm the only one to blame. I ain't picky, I'm just real specific. I want nothing less than terrific. I know y'all get it. I'm aggressive, so our style is clashing. Killer instinct, and I play with passion. I'd rather be hated for being one of the realest than get a lot of love for these overrated appearances. I can stand on skill alone, but I'm a package deal. I can write the whole song and rap for real. I got my head in the cloud with a pun intended. I don't need to see nobody, I don't want no visits. Introverted, I just flirt with the music. Small circles, how I choose it. Stay away from squares, they the one that look like a L7. I've been doing this since I was 11, and the shit gets real. Can we go way back, way back, way back? Can we go way back, way back, way back? It's time to go way back, way back, way back, way back. Pure pandemonium when I'm in the building. Grown man flow, I ain't got time for the children. Now you can boo me, jump off, I'm winning. I still love you though, shout out to the women. Watch, you was cool, they was acting wild. Walk in, leave drunk, it was packed for aisle. Belligerent students, man, the shit got messy. Remind me of my first show I did at the Red Sea. I ain't had no DJ, just the tape deck. Opened up for Son of Star Child, I love that. Met this cat named Larry, he was with the Avengers. Showed me how to make moves and walk with the winners. Soon went to the pen, I never seen him again. But I did a couple shows with his friends. Lumberjack, brown clown, so-and-so, and do with the orange pants. 10 years later, now I'm rocking the orange pants. But they jabos though, you know, fresh to death, always and forever. Don't get it twisted, #1 listed, Nitro, with the nice flow, you know, it is. Take a picture, baby, it'll last longer. All in your mouth, yeah. In retrospect, I'm just thinking back to the time when it was all good. The golden era.